My name is Untitled Chapter, and I'm 27 years old and I'm originally from the Netherlands and have moved to Geneva recently. I am a human rights advisor with Plan International's United Nations office here in Geneva. I am a human rights lawyer by training and by profession as well. And I studied international human rights law. I originally didn't follow this path though. I was originally a corporate law student, and I took the original typical track of law studies. However, I realized I really didn't like it and I wasn't passionate about it, and I wanted to follow what always was my natural interest into international diplomacy and human rights. I assist our country offices around the world. Plan International works in over 50 countries, and I assist their engagement with the United Nations mechanisms, which means on a more practical level that I help them develop alternative reports or other ways of engagement with the UN human rights system, and particularly the treaty bodies, and help them lobby these monitoring and review processes that look into the human rights violations, particularly of children's rights, in the countries that have obliged themselves to and committed themselves to these international standards. Well, as I already mentioned, I was particularly always very interested in the intersection between diplomacy and international human rights, and the politics that are very much always affecting human rights and violations as well. That brought me to study and do a master's in international human rights law. And I undertook multiple internships, and I realized particularly that I loved working in the NGO sector, as it really gives you the opportunity to tackle human rights violations that happen around the world. And so that's how I ended up here. So the positive aspects of this job is that you can really address certain human rights violations that are happening on the ground here in Geneva. Perhaps a negative aspect of it is that it might look very administrative or political, and you might wonder what the direct impact is on the ground. However, if you implement the recommendations and follow up on the recommendations that the UN gives out after you brief them on the certain violations, and if you do this follow-up work with your colleagues in the field, then you really can make a direct impact. So that's a really positive aspect, but sometimes a bit, it takes more time and more commitment, because it's a long process. It takes years sometimes to make real change in the UN system. So I was a representative of survivors of military sexual assault, and I brought their claims to the United Nations. And this had the most effect on me. I realized how much of a validation this brought to the women that I represented, and how much of a change that had to them dealing with these very grave violations. And it made me realize that I could do something with my legal background on this more international level. And it made me more passionate about using these different systems and realizing how you can change, bring about change. International Geneva, for me, represents the worldwide community coming together here in Geneva and to discuss international politics and human rights. This entire community is very passionate and very open for dialogue, which makes it a very interesting environment to work in. For anyone interested in this type of career, I would urge them to study languages, but also to undertake international experiences such as internships or volunteering abroad, so that can help you determining whether this is the right type of job for you or what makes you passionate about it. And then a lot to the table with those type of experiences if you end up working in NGO or diplomacy or international development. So that's very helpful. Yeah.